Okay, and I see that we are streaming on Facebook, so we can go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Allison. I'm part of the education department at the Timken, and we're excited to welcome you to one of our virtual tours. We do these tours every Thursday where we kind of walk through the collection. And so today we have a specific focus on 19th century American art from our collection. So we're excited. This is the first kind of tour of its kind that we've done just looking at our American art. So it should be a great lecture. Just a couple of notes before we begin. So if you're in our Zoom room, we ask that you keep yourself muted through the duration of the talk, just so that everyone can hear our wonderful docent speak and there's no interrupting. If you have any questions, you can always put them in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. So that's going to be, there's a little speech bubble, and underneath it, it says chat. You can type all your questions or comments there, anything you like. And then also, if you're joining us from Facebook, welcome to you as well. If you want to join the conversation, you can put your comments or questions or whatever in the comment section below the Facebook video. And we're monitoring that, so we'll get to those questions as well when we do a Q&A at the end. And then also, if you're in our Zoom room, you can always just unmute yourself at the end when we do our Q&A and ask your question then. So lots of opportunities, but yeah, we have a great talk coming up. And then, like I said, we'll do our Q&A at the end. So I'd like to welcome our docent for today, Karen Helmerson. Karen, you may have seen at multiple other tours. She's been great being with us through these virtual times. And as I said, today she will be presenting on 19th century American art from the Timken's collection. So Karen, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. We're so blessed to have Allison, our wonderful docent who's actually teaches at UC Davis part-time and is embarking on a PhD program in the fall. So thank you for all your work, Allison. We'll begin with a painting that is not in the 19th century, but I will tell you we have a stellar American collection, just absolutely stellar. And we do include some works from the colonial era, which I will introduce as a little prelude to what is really happening in the 19th century. So we'll begin with our really very exquisite Mrs. Thomas Gage by John Singleton Copley. And before I talk about this painting, I do want to sort of describe the era that we're going to be investigating. And it's basically a little more than 100 years, beginning with this painting and going into about 1888. What is happening in America? Well, we have the approaching American Civil War, the American Revolutionary War that begins in 1775. Actually, the date for this painting is 1773. There's a little bit of a typo there, so I apologize. We also have in the mid part of the 19th century, we have the Civil War beginning in 1861. And we have the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. The beginning of the Industrial Revolution starts a little later in America. It starts around 1820, even maybe a little bit earlier. Why do I bring the American Industrial Revolution up? Because it really changes the dynamic of what is happening in America. We also have the War of 1812. So there's all these wars and changes in our society that help create the interest in what we call the Hudson River painters. So we'll begin with a later part of the 18th century, this wonderful portrait by John Singleton Copley, who had deep ties to England and eventually does move to England to finish his career. But this is a portrait of an exquisite society woman. It was done in New York. She was married to Thomas Gage, who was the general for all the British troops prior to the American Revolution. She was Margaret Kimball, and Margaret Kimball was, as I mentioned, an upper-class woman, and she had a very interesting background. And what I mean by that is, if you look at her costume, she wears a turban. Why is she wearing a turban? Well, a couple reasons. One, sophisticated, aristocratic, upper-class women often dressed in costumes, and that even dates a little prior to that in the Rococo. We see it in the 19th century, but this was a kind of a form of costuming. Second of all, her father was Turkish, born Turkish, and her mother was Greek. So there was a sort of an exotic component to her heritage. So her husband commissions this wonderful, important portrait painter, the most important painter, a portrait painter of this era. And he paints an exquisite woman. And he actually thought this was his most successful painting of a woman. She's beautiful. She looks introspective. She looks intelligent. She doesn't look vacuous. She looks like she's not bothered by superficial concerns. She stares off into the sort of the space, You see her in this loose, exquisite dressing gown embellished with an embroidered belt. The pearls, and I've told you this before, you see it in her hair. The pearls were the bling of the upper classes before diamonds. So she's wearing some beautiful jewelry. Her dress is beautifully detailed. You see the folds of the fabric. You even see the detailing on that exquisite blue chair. The light falls on her gently. And the dress with all its folds may perhaps look like a ball gown. No, there were no balls happening prior to the American Revolution. And as I mentioned, this painting was actually 1773, and in 1775, the Revolutionary War begins. So things are very tumultuous in America. So she would not be dressed for a ball. They didn't have the balls. And also the loose fitting nature of the garment indicates that it was more for private wear. And thus we lead to the idea that this was a beautiful portrait for her husband, and a more personal portrait. And actually, he did a portrait of Gage himself, but we do not have that at Timken. So this is one of our stellar pieces of our 19th century and early late colonial period collection at the Timken. Now, I'm going to move on to our second colonial period painting, and this is Fidelia and Speranza by Benjamin West. West was the teacher of John Singleton Copley, so they had a very deep relationship. And like Copley, Benjamin West also ended up spending most of his career at the end of his life in England. Now, people may look at this Fidelia and Speranza and say, oh, is this based on Greek mythology because of the dress? No, it is actually based on Edmund Spenser's The Fairy Queen, 1590. He wrote an epic poem, and he wrote it with the idea of Christian virtues in mind. It's also indicated that he might have written this epic poem to honor Queen Elizabeth, because this was the Elizabethan era. What does it describe? All right, Fidelia, faith and hope. These are two characters from one of the poems from this, one of the portions of this epic poem. And it talks about, so faith and hope, faith in this beautiful white gown, holding the New Testament. And she has a chalice with a snake. What does that indicate? Well, it indicates that she has so much faith and her Christian values and virtues that she is not bothered by the fact that this snake might be maybe poisonous. Now, hope in sort of symbolically always carries an anchor, and you can see that in the folds of that beautiful gown. And speaking of the gown, it is taken from West's interest in European history and also Greco-Roman trends. So even though this is not based on Greco-Roman mythology, the dress and the manner of stance for these two figures, we call that contrapposto, where there's a weight shift from hip to leg. And so you can see them in almost in a sculptural vein, also with these beautiful flowing gowns and capes, and the detail, the light falls on their face. And we also see sort of like a medieval architectural structure. In the left-hand side, in the foreground, you see Uta and the Red Knight. Uta in the poem, The Fairy Queen, in this particular section, symbolizes truth. And the Red Knight is sort of human frailties and the human spirit. And she is trying to bring him from darkness and into the architectural realm of light. So this is based on literary themes, as Benjamin West was known to do. He was also known to paint very important portraits of American individuals, generals, for example, General Wolfe, he was very famous for that. And a really interesting sidebar is that we actually have a descendant living in San Diego, a contemporary artist named Jay Johnson, who happens to be someone I know and collect, but his descendant was Benjamin West, direct descendant. One more point I want to make out, look at the beautiful sky, the embellished botanical drawings. So it shows his skill not only as a painter of architectural elements, figurative elements, and then also this landscape. We're going to move on now to the idea of the Hudson River painters. The first truly American school of art is called the Hudson River painters. And the Thomas Cole was the first painter who really developed this, this body of painting. The first Hudson River painting by Cole was done about 1825. And probably the most iconic Hudson River painting is this, Kindred Spirits. Well, let's talk about some of the principles of the Hudson River School. It is called that because when Thomas Cole and Frederick Church and others began to paint what they call Hudson River paintings, they focus mostly on the Hudson River Valley, the Catskill Mountains, in which this painting is done. But eventually, second generation painters, who we were going to look at, started to branch out. They went across through westward expansion. They painted the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. They even went to places like Brazil with Martin John Heat. And we're going to look at those in just a second. So let's talk about the principles of the Hudson River painters. Thomas Cole and the writer Ashby, and the writer William Cullen Bryant, who are pictured here, depicted by the great early Hudson River painter Ashby Duran, talks about the principles of the Hudson River painters. And what are the principles? Well, first of all, nature. God is in nature. Nature, to preserve nature, is of the utmost importance. They looked at the writings of Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson and their writings about, and their musings about Walden Pond. They likened the change in American landscape. They wanted to preserve it. They actually were very important to the conservation movement. And some of the later Hudson River painters, like Thomas Moran, who we have in our collection, he helped develop the national park system. But they looked at Kant, they looked at Plato, they looked at Barbizon painters who explored the woods. They looked at the grandeur of America. They also were interested in the Transcendentalist movement that also believed in human individuality. God is in nature. Nature needs to be preserved and explored. So there were many fundamental principles of the Hudson River painters that was intellectual, based also on Ruskin, many philosophers and writers. Now, there's a really interesting story about this painting. First, we're going to describe it. I'm going to tell you this interesting story. So here we have the Catskill Mountains. And the Hudson River painters, Cole in particular, Ashby Duran, they romanticize the landscape. So this is actually a composite landscape. It's two coves that are not parallel, but he put them together because he did do some of these composite landscapes, although there are some realistic elements to it. What are the two kindred spirits, people who think alike? They're gazing on this magnificent landscape and hoping for its preservation and not liking the expansion of the American landscape. They're seeing industrialization, they're seeing the changes of agrarian life. A lot of things are happening in America. So these two kindred spirits are looking at this vast landscape and just commenting on its beauty and feeling the ineffable nature of this beauty. Also, in the, I believe it's on that tree trunk, they have actually carved their initials. They are connected. Now, let's talk a little bit about the history of this painting. Very sadly, Thomas Cole, who is pictured here with William Cullen Bryant, the writer, he died young. He was born in 1801, he died in 1848. So this painting was an homage to him. It was a memorial to him by Duran. And it was commissioned by a wealthy collector to be given to Bryant because he knew how much this relationship meant to both men. Now, the heirs of the Bryant family, the daughter in 2006 gave this painting, it was in her family, she gave this painting to the New York Public Library, where it remained for a number of years. But about 12, 13 years ago, one of the Walton heirs decided to create Crystal Bridges, a museum dedicated in Arkansas, Bentonville, Arkansas, to American painting. And so she acquired this painting because they deaccessioned it. The New York Public Library deaccessioned this painting and she purchased it for $35 million. Well, the reason why I tell you this story is there's, it's kind of a nefarious thing of deaccessioning, and the New York Public Library received a very critical comments because they didn't think it was right. But it is a magnificent painting and you can see it in Crystal Bridges. And we consider this the most iconic Hudson River painting. Speaking of iconic Hudson River painters, we also have some other varieties, and we have Thomas Birch. And this is an American ship in distress. Thomas Birch was actually British, came to America, and he became very famous for painting marine paintings based on the War of 1812. And so a lot of sea battles from that war, and he did such a careful job of depicting it, he became known as the great marine painter of this era. He also painted a companion piece to this that was very calm and benign. Here we see a ship in distress. So I do want to talk to you a little bit about what's going on in England because there's deep connections. He was British by birth and did come to America, but he was very interested in two very important British artists, J.M.W. Turner and John Constable. And why I mention those two artists is they had two sort of camps. One, Constable, shows man coexisting peacefully in nature. The other concept promoted by J.M.W. Turner is that man can be overcome by nature. And so we have that in this painting. We have this painting in our collection. This is beautiful birch. It's actually a very large painting. And you see these exquisite waves. You see he was influenced definitely by Thomas Cole because they were contemporaries and also Frederick Church. It's a large painting. The colors are magnificent. So what you see is a boat. We have a mainmast being snapped. We have a boat that looks like it perhaps may capsize. We have a small rowboat being dropped down into the water. We already have one rescue boat that's in the water. We have a steamship trying to create some type of support. We have a lighthouse in the background, and we have this beautiful sky that is, in one hand, rather calm, but you also have these impending clouds. So this shows man being overcome by nature by one of the most important marine Hudson River painters, because as I mentioned, many of these artists moved away from just the Hudson River Valley and the Catskills and went into New England, the Rocky Mountains, etc. One other point I want to make is we have a very important French painter, Vernet, and he was a marine painter, and Birch was very influenced by Vernet's work. So this is in our very own Timken collection. This is the course of the Empire of Savage State. This was an early Cole, and what Cole was doing at this time is he painted 5 paintings in this series, sort of describing what is happening in America. And he believed, as I mentioned earlier, that the American landscape was being corrupted by industrialization, the encroachment of factories and buildings, and our magnificent landscape was changing, and he wanted to preserve it. As I said, he was actually, important to the conservation of movement in America. And so what he believed is he felt America was becoming gluttonous and consumed sort of with greed. And he liked the idea of, and I don't mean to use this term pejoratively, of the savage, meaning the Native American who was close to the land, who loved the land, appreciated the land, lived off the land. And you can actually see in the fore to middle ground, a Native American on hunt. And we also see some trappings of teepees in the right middle ground. We see this magnificent sky. A lot of these artists were influenced by European landscape painters too. You can see a little element of that sort of Dutch beautiful sky that we talked about last in one of my lectures. You can also see that he was influenced by some of the Barbizon painters who began to paint the Barbizon woods, artists like Millet and Rousseau. One other artist that we will see not so much in this painting, but Claude Lorrain, who we actually have in our Timken collection, who also influenced landscape painting. So what we have is a belief by Cole that we really need to preserve and appreciate nature as our Native American brothers. Pardon me. I'm going to go through this a little bit more quickly because I do want to get to some of our Timken paintings. This is not in our Timken collection, but again, it represents the stellar beauty of this Hudson River first generation. Now, what is so interesting about this painting is actually, again, remember I said he romanticized a lot of landscapes. In reality, Niagara Falls, there was a lot of building around here, and not really attractive building, actually some factories, little kiosks, some sort of down on their luck type of buildings, and it wasn't as beautiful and exquisite as we see it here. Because again, this romanticizing of our American landscape. So you have to understand how America's developing. First, we have exploration, well, actually discovery. Then we have exploration of these lands, and then we have what's called settlement. So he is between this exploration and settlement. He's seeing American landscape change from the settlement and the industrialization and eventually war. Look at the autumn leaves, how the light falls on the water, the exquisite sky. It's meant to be a very contemplative painting. And you have to remember too that he felt this, as I mentioned, ineffable beauty in nature, that we can find God in nature. Nature is like our church. And so that is beautifully seen in this painting with rusts and greens and sort of the subtle light on the water. Just a really remarkable painting. Now, in our collection, one of my favorite paintings is Castine Harbor in Town. This is our Fitzhenry Lane. Lane was a second generation Hudson River painter, and we know that stylistically. We also know it by the date and also by the fact that he is part of what is called the luminous subcategory of Hudson River painters. And of course, you know the word luminous, luminosity refers to the word of light. And you see this exquisite light falling on this Castine Harbor in Maine. A little backdrop. Castine, Maine was the site of a Revolutionary War battle that did not go well for the Americans. So it has some sort of negative history, but it also is one of the oldest colonial places in America, dating from the latter part of the 1600s. So it's a really important place. Now, how is Fitzhenry Lane different than Cole, for example? Well, there's more of a quietude in his paintings. The light is very important. It was important to all these landscape painters, but in particular, light, luminosity, luminous, falls on the water, the sky is filled with light, and it's probably early morning, and he creates a very peaceful, almost grid-like configuration with the ships. It relates to Constable when you think about it, man coexisting peacefully in nature. But he was probably more influenced by the Dutch. He saw copies and some originals of Dutch 17th century landscape painting, people like Hobbema, Robert Salmon, Van Rysdale, and he was so interested in their stylistic approach, low horizon line, beautiful billowy cumulus clouds. Here we even have stratus clouds, cumulus clouds, and we have the town in the background. And it's calm, it's meticulous, very detailed. You don't really see that gestural brushstroke, and it's contemplative. And one other point I wanted to make about Lane, his father was a sailmaker, and he grew up in New England, I believe Gloucester, and he wanted to be a naval officer or even perhaps a sailor, but he was suffered from polio as a child. So what he decided to do for his career, he was a very talented artist, is he went up and down the eastern seaboard, Gloucester and Maine and all these places, Gloucester, of course, in Boston, and he painted what he saw, the beautiful light, the quietness, and just a very remarkable painter. One more painting, this is not in our collection, but as a comparison, this is Penobscot Bay. I apologize for the misspelling of evening. And if you look at this, it is elegiac. It is elegiac because in elegy, we celebrate and mourn, and we honor and mourn, I should say. And so this is a sort of a elegiac painting. We kind of mourn a quieter time. It is at the end of the day, a time of peace and quietude. And he captures it so beautifully, this serene seascape, and the ship just casually, quietly floating in this bay. And the colors are magnificent. The pale, pale pinks, the darkened waters, the shadow falling on the water. And again, as I mentioned earlier, he was influenced by the Dutch, and you can see that very low horizon line and the much bigger expanse of sky. So second generation, stylistically different, and concentrating more on the Eastern Seaboard. Now, let's go to another artist, a second generation Hudson River painter, Albert Bierstadt, sorry. And Bierstadt was German. He was part of the Dusseldorf School, and he came to America and he achieved tremendous success. Just like Frederick Church, who was a little bit earlier, was more Thomas Cole's generation, Bierstadt was so popular that, like Church, people who painted a series called Niagara Falls, for example, they would have art appreciation to such an extent that people would line up for city blocks and pay at the time an exorbitant amount of money, 50 cents, to look at some of their paintings. So I bring this up because I wanted to know that some of these Hudson River painters did achieve great success. Now, Bierstadt was very interesting because he wanted to really study the expanse of the American landscape, and he was asked to go on at least 2 or 3 expeditions to study the American landscape and record it. Now, the date of this painting is actually 1864, and this was done during the time of the American Civil War. But they were still continuing some expansion, and he asked to see Yosemite. He was very interested in Yosemite, and so he asked to be part of this survey team. Now, I'll talk a little bit about that, but I just want to mention one other thing. At this time, photography was being used. Remember, Matthew Brady captures the American Civil War, but it was very cumbersome. Daguerreotypes, these huge boxes, metal plates, chemicals. So although photographers did document westward expansion, he was chosen to be able to represent it with an artistic eye. So in the foreground to the right of the painting, you see some rocks, an outcropping of rocks, but you also see his tools. You see paints and brushes, and you see behind the cropping of rocks, you see 6 men who are part of the expedition surveying this particular landscape. And again, Bierstadt always heard about Yosemite, really wanted to see it. And at the time, they thought it was the most magnificent waterfall, maybe the largest waterfall, of course, Niagara Falls. But I have talked to people who have seen this. Unfortunately have not. And they said it's pretty realistic. So even though it is somewhat romanticized, it is a pretty solid depiction of that particular landscape. A couple other things I wanted to mention besides the men, we have a little boy gathering firewood. We see the Merced River. We see the light falling beautifully, a little bit of chiaroscuro to the left. We see the Merced River. We see the horses hobbled for evening. We always look at landscape and determine, is it morning? Is it dusk? This is closer to night and dusk. So we have people preparing for dinner. We have, as I said, the horses being hobbled so they can not travel during the night. We see the magnificence of the waterfall, the clouds surrounding it, and beautiful botanical depictions of the trees. So we capture this beauty of the westward expansion and Bierstadt's really amazing depiction of it. Now, one other comment I'd like to make is, even though these artists, when we know that Bierstadt did some plein air painting outdoors, like the Barbizon painters and eventually the Impressionists, who both schools of art were practicing in Europe at that time. I want to mention that this was really painted in his studio. So he sketched it, made multiple sketches, and then carried that back to New York, and then actually created this painting. It's rather large, so this is one of our magnificent paintings in our collection. Now, A Storm in the Rocky Mountains. I'm not going to take too much more time because I do want to get to some of more of our Timken paintings, but this is called A Storm in the Rocky Mountains, Mount Rosalie. We don't have that portion of the title. And the reason why I bring up Mount Rosalie is because that was his mistress. And he did eventually marry her, but he was so enamored with her when he painted this. This is an amazing, almost like dreamlike, romanticized version of the Rocky Mountains. And he did use some embellishments. For example, if we look at perspective, there's some Native Americans in very small figures of Native Americans in the painting. You can barely see them in the foreground, and you see the trees. He actually rescaled the painting. So the outcropping of rocks as part of the Rocky Mountains wasn't quite as large as this particular scene is depicted. but he again wanted to show its monumental qualities. So if you look, actually it's in the foreground, the little tiny figures of horses and Native Americans, that shows a scale that's a little bit contrived. I think what's so magnificent about this painting is the dark clouds. You see the clouds, the sky is opening up. You see the storm beginning to really boil. And it's just an amazing, that school, that light that falls on the hills. It's just so romantic and so exquisite. And you can see that it is so powerful. It's like you can see spirituality and religion in a landscape like this. Now, Martin John Heade, really interesting painter, Approaching Thunderstorm. So let's just take a moment to compare. Approaching Thunderstorm, one stylistically done, this is another one. Now, let's talk a little bit about Martin John Heade. Heade was a traveler, and he traveled quite a bit. He traveled in South America, he went to Florida, he went to Europe, and he captures his own sort of special second generation Hudson River style. He was a much quieter painting in the sense that he didn't do these craggy mountains and massive waterfalls. He liked the calm little inlets, the marshes, the dunes, botanical trees. He is a much quieter depiction of landscape. The thing that was really different about Heade too, and I'm going to show you one of our beautiful Heades in our collection, he was a figurative painter, very successful figurative painter. He was a magnificent landscape painter, and was uniquely strong as a still life painter. So he really had a variety of success in those areas. Here we have an approaching storm, and it is as the storm is brewing. We don't really see the storm, but we do see the darkening water. We see the contemplative figure gazing out in the distance. We see a rowboat in the middle ground and a sailboat. So we know a storm is going to brew, but it's just that kind of calm and darkness before the storm as this figure observes it. And one thing I love Heade's work, I think it's magical, and you'll see it in the next painting, the way he uses light. He loved light. He was very careful. He looked at some of the French landscape painters, and he really captures his own essence in this school of art. Now, this is our magnificent magnolia blossom in our Timken collection. And it was done after he moved from Brazil to Florida. And he loved the sort of subtropical qualities of the Florida landscape. And magnolia blossoms are ubiquitous there. And he fell in love with them. And he painted them many times. In fact, he did something like 15 paintings of the same theme. What's unique about our Timken painting is that it's the only one that we know of, or one of the few, that has a red backdrop. The others are all done in blue. Now, this luxurious red cloth gives it a sense of even more elegance to this magnolia blossom. And what does a magnolia blossom symbolize? Well, flowers have a deep representation in painting, particularly in the 17th century, even in the 18th, 19th century. They have symbolic references. The Dutch and Flemish artists in particular infused the flowers and still lifes with metaphorical ideas. And there is a little bit of that here, but I do want to tell you that what does a magnolia blossom in art represent? Strength, integrity. It represents self-confidence, self-esteem, so power. So it has a very interesting connection. And how he paints this magnolia blossom is really stunning. It is flawless. There are no bruises and tears in the beautiful white petals, and the leaves are strong, although there is a variation in color. You have a very powerful stem. I don't know if powerful is a word, but strong stem. And this flower looks almost sculptural. Now, to infuse it with a little deeper meaning, perhaps, in the flower represents in art often, well, white purity, but it also represents the ephemeral nature of life. You pick a little flower and it's a bud, it's like a youth, and then it begins to open up, and that as our life is evolving, and then at the end when it begins to drop its petals, we think of the end of life. So it really represents a cycle of life. And in this perhaps does represent the strength of someone young, our young country. And so perhaps there is a little bit of that a metaphorical representation in this magnolia blossom from our own Timken collection. Now, another important artist, George Inness. This is another painting in our collection. And I do identify that because I did, as you probably realize, I did include paintings from other museums I think help to explain this artistic movement. Aricia is an actual town in outside of Rome. And George Inness made several trips to Italy, as did other artists. And he loved, he studied Italian and French painting. And this is a town outside of Rome. And he painted it many times. And what we see in this painting is several things. First of all, let's look at the buildings in the painting in the middle to background. The cupola, the dome, is by the great Baroque artist Bernini. So that is a building that exists in this region. And we have like a fortress-like structure, probably medieval or Renaissance. And in the foreground, we have a stone bridge with figures and animals crossing it. And in the background, we have this gorgeous sky with a sliver of a moon to the left. So he creates 3 registers for this painting, very, very careful perspective. If you look at it, you can't help but noticing that he has studied the work of Claude Lorrain, a very important Baroque French painter. And he was also aware of some of the Italian landscape painters. He creates, quote, an Arcadian landscape. Aricia exists, these buildings exist, but he makes it so peaceful and so exquisite that it's contemplative, it's romanticized. It makes it so idyllic. And that was a very important concept to him. So he infuses his training as an American artist, a great traveler in Europe, with European tradition as well as American tradition. And also, again, he was conscious of the Barbizon painters who painted the Barbizon woods, the predecessors to the French Impressionists. Because of time constraints, I'm going to move on. There's a lot to say about this painting, but we do have a couple of others I really would like you to see. So we will move on and go to our amazing cranberry harvest, island of Nantucket. Eastman Johnson was such an important American artist in the latter part of the 19th century. You know, besides being an artist, he helped create and develop the Metropolitan Museum in New York. He used his power and expertise to do that. Now, Johnson was a very special artist. He also wanted to focus on the changing of the dynamics of American life. By the critic Robert L. Pincus, who has done writing for our Timken Museum. He's written 7 books. He's a wonderful, one of the most important writers and critics on the West Coast. I'm so blessed to have a friendship with him. He wrote about this painting. We've discussed this painting many times, and he wrote about this painting in the Wall Street Journal about 5 years ago. And he said to him and to many others, this was the greatest Eastman Johnson ever done. We do have an Eastman Johnson in the SDMA collection, San Diego Museum of Art, and I will show you that in just a moment. So let's talk about this cranberry harvest. Well, remember, this was the beginning of the Gilded Age. So we see a lot of changes in America, and not always very good. We see technology and well, I should say industrialization has really taken over. And so what Eastman Johnson wants to depict in this painting, before I describe exactly what it is, he wants to comment on the changing of the agrarian life in America. We no longer have this pastoral, handmade, hand-done kind of life. We have factories, we have advancement in things that was positive for America, but we also have things that detracted from American life. And what he wants to depict, and what Bob Pincus's supposition is that in all of art history, not just in American art, not just in 19th century art, but maybe in all of art history, we have never seen a community working together to achieve a common goal. What is the common goal? To harvest the cranberries. Now, everybody assumes the cranberries are watery and boggy, but cranberries are picked often when it's sandier and drier, obviously. And so we have a community on Nantucket Island where Eastman Johnson loved to vacation, showing over 40 individuals, mostly women and children, harvesting the cranberries. We see some gentlemen here. We actually see in the center left an older gentleman bending over and picking the cranberries. We see a young boy as he glides across with probably his little brother or sister, and the mother who creates like a beacon and an anchor for the painting, and she is directly center. You can see the magnificent light, the shadows as it falls on the landscape. And that is because, of course, he studied the Dutch, he studied the French, and he looked at the importance of light. And that is definitely depicted so successfully in this painting. It's a very horizontal painting. Another thing I wanted to mention about this painting is it took 17 preparatory drawings to create this. And years ago, the Timken did a magnificent exhibition many years ago where they showed these preparatory drawings. And you saw how Johnson created this magnificent, rather large horizontal painting with multiple figures in very detailed landscape. He didn't just start to sketch it out. He had to meticulously arrange it. A couple other things I wanted to point out besides the beautiful light, the detailed landscape, the figure development. We also see in the background a windmill, a church, and a lighthouse. And those were not, this was a narrative. He did see this particular vision, so to speak, and he records it, but he infuses it with some sort of narrative about life in this community. But he believed that those three elements, that I just mentioned, the church, the lighthouse, and the windmills were so important to society, and so he does depict that in this painting. Quickly, I do want to show you this magnificent, although the other painting is considered the most important, this is also an important Eastman Johnson, and this is in our Timken collection. I do know that the date should have been put as, I believe it was 1874, so it was done before the Nantucket. And it shows a woman in repose, she's reading, and you can definitely see how he was influenced by the Dutch, because you really have that low horizon line, as I mentioned, that beautiful body of sky, and we have her hat, her interesting hat, and it's reflected in the sailboat with the shadow of the sailboat captured. So this is a beautiful, more vertical painting. Again, this contemplative, quiet, sort of melancholy depiction of just, a woman reading quietly. I am going to, let me see if I'm going to skip on to a painting I think is really important. And I apologize because we are running out of time. And I do want to talk about Winslow Homer and this particular painting. So Winslow Homer was very connected to Europe. He studied in Europe. He studied in Italy in his 30s. And he came back to America and was very influential in capturing the American Civil War. He was a very important Civil War artist who later kind of, after that sort of trauma of capturing the American Civil War, he decided to really look at other elements of society, children at play, men hunting, men fishing. And so it's kind of that macho concept, but also he trained as an illustrator. So his details are remarkable. And I really quickly want to talk about this painting before we wrap it up, but this fog warning is just incredible. And what it talks about is when he lived in Europe, when he lived in England, he saw the difficult life of some of these British fishermen and also in New England. And what he saw is a very dangerous profession. And we see that in this fog warning. Remember I told you, man does not always coexist peacefully in nature. And a fisherman, probably done in England actually, has some halibut in the boat, so he's been successful. However, the storm is coming, the fog is coming, and you can see that if he doesn't keep his eye on the little boat to the right middle to background, he is going to lose his life. One false move, and this fisherman will not survive. He's got to get back to the main boat. He's got to be able to keep his eye where the clouds are forming. So it's dangerous, it's treacherous. He knows that this could happen to him. So this fog warning, honestly, is depressing because it does show that at any moment, something can occur that thwarts our very existence. So Winslow Homer, one of the most important artists of the later 19th century. I just want to see if there's any A quick, lastly, just I'll spend one more minute on our own John F. Pito. This is one of our later paintings in our museum. This is in our American Gallery. So just a real quick still life, trompe l'oeil, fool the eye, and it's talking about sort of passing of time and the fact that Pito was discovered not to the 1950s. So anyway, I see our time is up for my discussion, and if maybe Allison can field some questions for us, that would be terrific.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karen. A great look at our American art collection and some of them that I hadn't heard a ton about before, so that was really interesting. I do want to open it up now to questions. I don't see any in the chat, but if anyone does want to type their question there, you can also go ahead and unmute yourself and ask, or you can also do the hand raise function and I'll call on you, any of those. And maybe while people are thinking of questions, I can get us started, because something that I noticed in all of these is the really dramatic use of light. And then you did talk about a lot about that, about the different ways that light is used. And it reminded me of how light is used in portraiture also, you know, not just for kind of practical purposes of, oh, like this is what time of day it is, we're setting the scene, but also to create drama or some kind of, you know, expression. And so I was just kind of wondering, where do you think that, you know, is that inspiration from portraiture? Is it from maybe photography, which you also said was part of the inspiration, or is it kind of landscape's own feel, like thing?
Okay, first of all, that is an incredibly interesting and important comment. I want to harken back, and not to say that the Italians, I mean, Caravaggio and chiaroscuro, and it's really important. We see it in the Baroque, we see it beginning in the Renaissance. But I do want to point out a group of artists who really made light very important, and that was the Dutch and Flemish 17th century landscape painters, because the Dutch, as I said before, were really great scientists and studying the sky and studying weather patterns, and they made light so important in their landscapes, and they also in their still life paintings, because they saw you could create reflection, you could create, like you said, drama, and that carries over into portraiture. So I believe for these artists, they were particularly interested in the Baroque. And artists like Claude Lorrain, Nicolas Poussin, they looked at those French painters. And then they also looked at the Barbizon painters who went out in nature, the Barbizon woods, and captured light and the drama of light. So yeah, I think it was, they saw light as a very important dramatic effect. They love to study weather patterns, as you mentioned, and time of day. So it's all about the landscape before it's painted and how it shows so many important elements in the paintings. I hope that answers.
Yeah, definitely. And that is interesting, because that's something that I hadn't thought of, sort of the development of science at the same time, and better understanding even how, you know, light enters our atmosphere, all of that. That maybe
and photography, as you mentioned, because, you know, photography in Laycock Abbey was evolving at the very beginning of the 19th century, like 1811, I believe. So photography was, you know, they were very influenced by that as well.
Yeah, exactly. And especially because they almost had to contend with it, you know, why do you need paintings now, right? If you can just
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's see, does anyone else have any questions? Like I said, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask. If you're on Facebook, you can also put your question in the comment there. We did have a couple of comments, just people saying thank you, and a request to talk about the ones that you had to skip. So you'll have to do that next time.
Absolutely. I always put in way too many paintings to really talk about. So thank you for everyone who attended. I hope you come back, and it's really great to have you. And please come to our Timken Museum when we open in the fall. The collection is marvelous. The new changes will be magnificent, and we all look forward to that time.
Yeah. All right. Well, if there are no questions, last call. Oh, we do have a question. When is the next date? So I'm guessing that means our next lecture. So our next tour will be the same time next week. So we do these every Thursday at 11 a.m. And you can always find the link through our events page. So if you go to our website, timkenmuseum.org, there's an events tab. You can click on that. Might be how you got to this one in the first place. But they're always there, and we have multiple events coming up.
Right. I just want to mention, I believe, Allison, they can get onto my senior lecture series, because I also have I particularly have a lecture March 17th, and it will be neoclassicism to Impressionism in French painting, and that will be March 17th, and that is on a Wednesday. So that just,
So that'll be kind of the same time period a little bit. So
yeah, that's why I wanted to kind of mention that.
yeah, okay, awesome. Well, I'll be there. So
Thank
I
you.
hope some of you can join us. But yeah, like she said, March 17th, which is a Wednesday. And then every week we do a more Timken focused tour on Thursdays at 11 a.m. So thanks so much for joining us,
Thank
and we
you.
hope to see you next time. Everyone stay safe. Thanks.
Bye-bye.